My wife joked. Look at his dad bod. He should be grateful I haven't cheated yet. In front of her entire family. 7 people laughed, while I quietly recorded everything in my notes app. For 11 weeks, I watched her spend $3,400 while she called me sensitive. At the next dinner, I exposed a truth so dark that her brother dropped his fork and every face in the room turned white. My name is not important. What matters is this. At 28, I ran half marathons. I had a job I was proud of, a savings account I built from scratch, and enough energy to show up for the people around me. I wasn't flashy. I wasn't the guy who needed to be the loudest in the room. But I was solid, and I knew it. By 36, I was tired in a way that sleep didn't fix. I met her at 31, the same year I bought the house. The house mattered because of how I got it. My father passed and left me $240,000 cash. I put every dollar of it into that property. The deed went into my name only. It was the one thing I did that year that felt completely, cleanly mine. She moved in 8 months later, 2 weeks before the wedding. She never asked whose name was on the deed. I never brought it up. That was her first mistake. The first few years were fine. Not great, but fine. I kept showing up to the dinners, the family events, the weekends that revolved around her schedule and her plans. I covered my share of the bills and then some. I stayed present. But somewhere in the middle of all that showing up, I realized she never asked how I was doing. Not really. I was carrying the kind of emotional load that doesn't show up on a balance sheet: the planning, the smoothing things over, the quiet work of keeping a household functioning, and she treated it like furniture. Expected, invisible, only noticed when something was missing. The comments started small, a remark about my weight at a cookout, a joke about my career at a dinner with her coworkers. Always in front of people, always wrapped in a laugh, so that if I reacted, I was the one killing the mood. When I said something once, quietly, in the car on the way home, she turned to me and said, "You always make yourself the victim." So I stopped saying something. On March 14th, 2 years before the Carolwood dinner, I opened the notes app on my phone and typed out what had happened that evening. Date, time, what she said, who was there. I wasn't thinking about lawyers or leverage. I just needed somewhere to put it, somewhere that wouldn't tell me I was overreacting. I kept adding to it. A note from 11 months before the dinner. She told her sister my career was safe but not impressive. I was sitting 3 feet away. A note from the previous summer. She introduced me to a new neighbor and said, "He used to be athletic." Past tense. Like I was a version of herself she'd already moved on from. A note from a birthday dinner 2 years back. She spent 20 minutes at the table explaining to her cousin why she had higher standards than most women. I sat next to her the whole time. Every entry had a date. Every entry had the names of anyone present. By the night of that dinner in Carolwood, I had 47 entries. I never showed her a single one. The dinner at Carolwood happened every 3rd Saturday of the month. Her parents' house, long driveway, oak dining table that seated 12, a chandelier above it that flickered whenever someone slammed the kitchen door. Her mother always cooked. That night it was brisket. The house smelled good when I walked in, and for a moment it felt like a normal Saturday. I'd driven 40 minutes to get there. I brought a $35 bottle of wine and set it on the counter without making anything of it. Her brother was already there with someone new, a woman I hadn't met before, friendly, still in the phase where she laughed at everything to show she fit in. Her father sat at the head of the table, the way he always did, quiet and steady. Her mother moved between the kitchen and the dining room. Nothing about any of it felt different from any other month. We sat down and it was fine for the first 22 minutes. I know because I'd checked my watch when we moved from the living room to the table, and I remember the clock on the wall when it happened. She was mid-story about something at work, the kind of story where she was clearly the smartest person in the room, and then she paused. She turned toward her mother. She gestured at me with her wine glass, the way you gesture at something that belongs to you. "Look at that dad bod. Honestly, he should be grateful I haven't cheated yet." 7 people laughed. Her brother, her mother, the new girlfriend the loudest, because she was still auditioning for the table and didn't understand what she was laughing at. Her father didn't laugh. He looked down at his plate and he stayed there. I smiled. I finished my plate. I helped clear the dishes. When she said she wanted to stay for another drink with her mom, I said fine. At the door, her father shook my hand and held it a half-second longer than usual. He looked at me, but didn't say anything. Just nodded, once, and let go. I drove home alone. 40 minutes, no radio. And somewhere on that drive, I decided I was done explaining myself to anyone at that table. But I still had one more dinner to get through first. She came home the next morning. I was in the kitchen when she walked in, still in the same clothes from the night before, keys in her hand, already moving toward the coffee maker like she'd just stepped out for an hour. I waited until she'd poured her cup. Then I said, quietly, that the joke at dinner wasn't funny. She turned and looked at me the way you look at someone who's made a scene over nothing. God, you're so sensitive. That was the whole response. 4 words. Then she set her mug down and picked up her phone. 10 seconds later, she said, "Can you book that reservation for my work dinner Thursday? The place on 5th. I keep forgetting to do it." I looked at the microwave clock. It was 9:14 on a Sunday morning. I had just told my wife that something she said in front of her entire family had hurt me, and she had pivoted to a restaurant reservation before I'd even finished the sentence. I didn't push. I didn't repeat myself. I'd learned what happened when I repeated myself. It became more material. Another exhibit in the case she built about me being too much, too sensitive, too difficult to deal with. So I said, sure, I'd take care of it. She nodded and took her coffee to the other room. I stood at the counter for a moment, stared at the clock, and then I opened my phone and started a new note. That was the last time I brought it up. What I did instead was get quiet. Not the sulking kind of quiet she expected, and could dismiss the other kind. The kind where you stop spending energy on something that isn't coming back. I stopped volunteering information about my day. I stopped filling the silence at dinner. I answered questions when she asked them. I kept up with what needed to be handled around the house. But I stopped carrying the emotional load of a relationship where only one of us was paying into it. I didn't announce any of this. I just stopped. She noticed something was different. She called it moodiness. She told her friend on the phone that I'd been weird lately. She didn't ask me directly what was wrong, because asking would have meant engaging with the possibility that something she'd done was the reason. So she named it moodiness and moved on. 3 days after that Sunday morning, Monday, 5:30 a.m., I was at a gym I hadn't walked into in 2 years. I'd called to reinstate my membership the Friday after the Carolwood dinner. The same afternoon, I called my financial advisor and scheduled a consultation. I was up and out the door before she woke up. She didn't ask where I'd been when I got home. I made coffee, showered, and went to work. I didn't tell her about the gym. I didn't tell her about the call to my advisor either. And she didn't ask. 6 weeks. That's how long it took before anyone outside the house noticed something had changed, and the first person to say anything wasn't her. I was coming back from the gym on a Tuesday morning, still in my workout clothes, when my neighbor Evelyn caught me at the end of the driveway. She walked her dog every morning at the same time, and I'd seen her out there dozens of times over the years. That morning she stopped, looked at me for a second, and said, "You look good. Something's different about you." I said I was just sleeping better. She nodded like she didn't entirely believe me but wasn't going to push. I went inside and made breakfast. I was going 4 mornings a week, 5:30 a.m., before she was awake. The gym was the one part of my day that had nothing to do with the marriage. Nobody was watching, nobody was commenting, nobody was keeping score. I just showed up and did the work and drove home. By the end of week 3, I felt like myself again in a way I hadn't in longer than I wanted to calculate. Evelyn wasn't wrong. Something was different. I just wasn't ready to explain what it was. During those 6 weeks, she made 2 more comments. One at a friend's birthday dinner, something about how I used to be fun at parties. One on a Wednesday night at home, when I came back from the gym and she looked up from the couch and said, "You're going a lot lately. Don't overdo it." No encouragement, just a ceiling. Like my improvement was something she needed to manage. I logged both of them. Dates, context, who was present, exact words. She still hadn't asked why I was quieter. She still hadn't mentioned the Carolwood dinner. As far as she was concerned, that evening had passed and I had gotten over it, the way she expected me to get over everything. She was performing the marriage. I was documenting it. By week 6, I had a separate bank account at a different institution, a legal consultation already scheduled, and had lost 11 pounds. That last number surprised even me. The bank account came after I sat down with 3 months of joint credit card statements the weekend before my consultation. I wasn't looking for anything specific, I just wanted to understand where we stood financially going in. What I found was $3,400 in discretionary charges over 90 days. Spa visits, dinners out with friends, a weekend away she described to me as a work trip, with no work-related charges anywhere in the statement. All of it on the joint card. All of it during a stretch where she'd told me at least twice that we needed to watch our spending. I didn't say a word about it. I took screenshots of every statement, saved them to a folder on my phone, and the following Friday, I opened a checking account at a bank she'd never heard me mention. I moved my direct deposit over that same afternoon. She didn't notice for 3 weeks. I want to be honest about something. There was a point, maybe a week before I filed, where I sat down and thought through what this was actually going to cost me. Not financially, I'd already worked through the numbers with my attorney. I mean the other kind of cost. The kind that doesn't appear in any document. The first thing I had to accept was that she was going to tell a story about this, and her story was going to land before mine did. She would tell her family that I had changed, that I checked out, went cold, became someone she didn't recognize. And the honest answer is that she wouldn't be entirely wrong. I had changed. I had checked out deliberately, because staying emotionally available to someone who used that availability against me was a cost I'd stopped being willing to pay. But that's not the version she was going to give them. Her version was going to be about abandonment. A husband who gave up without warning, without reason, without giving her a chance. She was already writing it. I could see the shape of it forming every time she described our marriage to people at parties. Her family was going to believe her first. That was just the math. They'd known her longer, they loved her, and she was very good at being the wronged party when the situation called for it. Some of them might come around once the full picture became clear. Some of them never would. I had to decide that was acceptable. The house was not a risk. My attorney had been direct about it. The deed was in my name only, purchased entirely with inheritance funds 7 months before we married. No marital money had gone toward the down payment, and the mortgage had been paid off from the same inherited funds before she ever moved in. She could contest it. Her attorney would pull the deed, read the dates, check the payment history, and tell her to drop it. That was going to go the way it was going to go. The real exposure was harder to document. 8 years. That's what I was writing off. Not all of it was bad. Some of it was genuinely good, and pretending otherwise would be its own kind of dishonesty. But enough of it had been bad that staying was no longer a reasonable option. You don't need an attorney to tell you that. You just have to sit with the number and decide what it means. I sat with it for 3 days. Then I made the appointment. She was already writing the version of events where I was the villain. I just needed mine to be airtight. I filed on a Tuesday morning while she was at work. County Courthouse, 9:47 a.m. I signed the petition for dissolution of marriage, handed the paperwork across the counter, and walked back to the parking lot. I sat in my car for a few minutes, not because I was uncertain, but because I wanted to mark the moment before I drove back into the rest of the day. The filing had the house address on it, same address as the inheritance deed. Same property, 2 different chapters. She was served 4 days later. I was at the gym when it happened. She asked me to come to the next monthly dinner. I said yes. I want to be clear about why. It wasn't because I needed a confrontation or an audience. It was because the same 8 people who had laughed at that table 11 weeks earlier were going to be in that room again, and I thought they deserved to be present when the full picture came into view. Not because I was going to give a speech, just because I was going to be there, and so was the truth, and sometimes that's enough. I drove the 40 minutes. I wore something I'd picked out myself, not the kind of thing she used to lay out on the bed and tell me looked better than what you usually choose. I felt like myself walking up that driveway. That sounds like a small thing. After the past year, it wasn't. Her brother saw me first. He was in the hallway when I came through the door, and he stopped and actually looked at me. "Hey," he said. "You look good, man." I thanked him and kept moving. In the dining room, her mother glanced up from the table and asked if everything was okay, because I seemed very quiet tonight. Before I could answer, my wife's voice came from across the room. "He's always like this. He just doesn't like coming here." She said it lightly, like she was translating me for the table, like my silence was a weather pattern she'd learned to explain to guests. I sat down without responding. Her father was already at the head of the table. When I took my seat, he looked at me, not a glance, a full look, and I held it for a moment before we both looked away. The chandelier above us flickered once when someone shut the kitchen door. Dinner moved the way those dinners always did. Her mother served, her brother poured. My wife talked louder than usual, filling every pause, the way people talk when they're covering something they don't want anyone to look at directly. I noticed her check her phone twice before the food was on the table. I ate. I answered when someone spoke to me. I didn't perform anything. It was her mother who said it. Midway through the meal, in a gap between conversations, she looked across the table at my wife and said, Didn't you get some kind of paperwork this week, honey? The table went still. My wife's jaw tightened for just a second before she found her footing again. It's nothing, she said. We're going through some stuff. It's complicated. She reached for her wine. He just kind of checked out of the marriage. Out of nowhere. I really don't want to get into it tonight. Her brother looked at me. I looked at my plate. Out of nowhere, her father said. He said it quietly, almost to himself, but the table heard every word. He set his fork down and looked at his daughter. Did you ever apologize for what you said about him at this table? The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd heard in months. My wife cycled through 3 expressions before landing on something that looked like offense. Dad, that was a joke. He knows it was a joke. That has nothing to do with any of this. I'm asking if you apologized. She didn't answer. I reached into my pocket and took out my phone. I opened the Notes app, found entry 47, and looked up at the table. I can read it, I said. If that helps. I read the date. I read the location. I read her exact words back to the room. Look at that dad bod. Honestly, he should be grateful I haven't cheated yet, and then I read the names of everyone present. All 7 of them. Every person sitting in that dining room was on the list, because every person sitting in that dining room had been there. Nobody moved. Then her brother set his fork down on the edge of his plate. Same table. Same chairs. Same gesture I had made 11 weeks earlier, alone in this room, when I decided I was done. He put the fork down and he said, "She did say that." I laughed. I shouldn't have. My wife turned on him. Are you serious right now? I'm just saying what happened. She looked around the table. Her father was watching her. Her mother was looking at her hands. The new girlfriend had gone completely still. There was no one left to perform for. She turned back to me, and her voice had dropped to something almost quiet. So what, you've just been keeping a list this whole time? That's insane. That's genuinely insane. I looked at her for a moment. I have 47 entries, I said. Want me to read you the other 46? She didn't answer. I closed the app. I finished my water. I thanked her mother for dinner, walked to the front door, and shook her father's hand. He held it the same way he had the last time, half a second longer than necessary, a nod, no words. I don't know exactly what he was trying to say, but I think I understood it. I walked to my car. I didn't look back at the house. Her attorney contacted mine about the house 3 weeks after I walked out of that dinner. I wasn't surprised. It was the move I had anticipated, the one I'd spent 6 weeks preparing for. My attorney sent over the deed, the purchase records, the full inheritance documentation, and the payment history showing the mortgage had been retired entirely from inherited funds before we were married. Her attorney reviewed everything. She was advised to drop the claim. She dropped it within the week. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday, different Tuesday than the filing, but I noticed that. Same courthouse. Same counter. I picked up the final decree, and the house address printed at the top was the same address that had been on the inheritance deed 8 years earlier. Same property. 2 different chapters. I stood at that counter for a moment longer than I needed to, and then I folded the papers, put them in my jacket, and walked out. She kept the living room furniture, her car, and a joint savings account that had $4,200 left in it by the time we divided it. I kept the house, the separate account I had opened the Friday after Carolwood, and everything in it. The split was not complicated. When the paperwork is clean, the ending tends to be clean too. I still go to the gym 4 mornings a week at 5:30. I ran a half marathon again last spring, the first one in 8 years. Coming up that last quarter mile, I was thinking about a lot of things. None of them were about her. That surprised me, and then it didn't. When I got home, Evelyn was out front walking her dog, the way she always is. She looked up and waved from the end of the driveway. The same neighbor who had told me, 6 weeks into all of this, that something was different about me. She was right. Something was different. I just hadn't been ready to explain it then. I'm ready now. The Notes app still has 47 entries. I haven't deleted it. I don't need it anymore, but I'm keeping the record. If you've been carrying someone else's contempt and calling it love, you already know how this story feels. You don't need me to explain it. She said I should be grateful she hadn't cheated. And I am grateful. I'm grateful I finally stopped waiting for her to.